Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. Chapter 1. Mary Lennox. Mary Lennox was a skinny little 10-year-old girl who was used to living in India all her life. She had thin yellow hair and an ugly yellow face with an angry look. She was always upset with something or somebody. Her father was always busy, and her mother cared more for going to parties than for looking after her only child. So, when Mary was born, she was given to an Indian servant called Aya, who was told to keep the child out of sight. Mary became a rude, spoiled and selfish child, used to always being obeyed by her servants. She never liked anybody, and so she had nobody to play with her, because there was not a single person who liked her. One extremely hot morning, she woke up, and instead of seeing her Aya, she saw another servant. She asked, "Why have you come? I will not let you stay. Send my Aya to me." The servant looked frightened, but replied that her Aya couldn't come. This made Mary so angry that she started kicking and hitting the poor woman, but her Aya did not come back. There was definitely something strange about that morning. Nothing seemed to be done the way it had always been done. No Aya, no morning wash, no help with getting dressed, no one to play with. In fact, most of the servants seemed to be missing. So Mary decided to walk around the house. She found her mother on the veranda talking to a young man. The man looked very worried. Mary overheard her mother asking him, "Is it really so very bad?" "Awful. You should have left 2 weeks ago." "I know, but I had to go to this silly party." "You never said that it had broken out among your servants," he said. "Because I didn't know," replied Mary's mother. Nobody had told Mary that cholera had broken out, and her Aya had died, and that people around her were dying very suddenly. Everyone was panicking, and they had completely forgotten about Mary. In a few days, all the servants had either died or run away. Mary's parents had died too. But Mary knew nothing. She suspected that she was the only person left in the house because it was very quiet around. The only thing she could do was wait for somebody to come and look after her. She was tired, and she slept most of the time. When she finally woke up, she heard 2 male voices. They were talking about what had happened. They thought that everyone had died. Suddenly, they noticed Mary sitting on her bed. "That's the kid," said one of them. "They must have forgotten all about her." "Why was I forgotten?" asked Mary. "Why has nobody come for me?" "Poor little kid, because there is nobody left to come." Although many had died, Mary didn't feel sorry for anyone but herself. She could not stay in India because no one could and no one wanted to look after her there. So she was sent to England, to her uncle, Mr. Archibald Craven. Mary never cared much about who she was living with, as long as she had somebody to look after her. So now the only thing that interested her was what her new Aya would be like, and if she would treat her like her old Aya did. But sometimes her heart felt strangely heavy with loneliness, and she wondered why she had never belonged to anybody, not even to her father or mother. Mary was sent to England with an officer's wife, and in London she was met by Mrs. Medlock, Mr. Craven's housekeeper. Mary didn't like Mrs. Medlock very much, and she wasn't at all interested in the new place she was going to. She did not even bother to ask any questions about her uncle. "Do you know anything about your uncle?" Mrs. Medlock asked Mary when they had sat down in the train. "No." "You've never heard your father and mother talk about him?" "No." Mrs. Medlock was surprised. "I suppose you should be told something. You're going to a strange place. Mr. Craven lives in a very old and very big house. It's about 600 years old, and there are nearly 100 rooms in it. Most of them are locked, though. The manor is at the edge of the moor, and is surrounded by gardens and a park. What do you think? Nothing. Don't you care? It doesn't matter whether I care or not, Mary said. Mr. Craven has a crooked back. He was a very sour man before he got married, but his wife was as kind and delicate as a flower. Why was? Asked Mary, who started listening despite herself. The poor woman died, said Mrs. Medlock. Did she? Said Mary. Since her death, Mr. Craven has lived on his own. He travels abroad a lot, and if he's at home, he never meets other people. So don't expect him to talk to you. You'll be told which room is yours and which gardens you are allowed to play in. Not a word was spoken during the rest of the journey together, and it was dark when they reached the station. A man in a carriage was waiting for them to take them both to the manor. What's the moor? Mary suddenly remembered the word Mrs. Medlock used. It's dark outside now, said Mrs. Medlock, but if you look out the window, you'll see it soon. But Mary could not see anything apart from the darkness covering the endless wild land. She didn't like it. When they arrived, Mary was taken to her room. It had been a long day, and she quickly fell asleep. In the morning, Mary woke up to find a village girl sitting by the fireplace with a smile on her face. It was Martha, a servant girl helping in the house. Mary, who was used to being washed and dressed by her Indian servants, got angry with Martha for not helping her get dressed and put on her shoes. Martha, on the other hand, could not believe her own eyes. She had never seen a grown girl who needed help with her clothes and shoes. But when Martha got so angry that she burst into tears, Martha finally helped her to put on her dress. Then she showed her to the next room, where breakfast was already waiting for her on the table. It was porridge. Mary looked at it and said she wasn't hungry. Not hungry? Asked Martha with a surprise. Ma, if my little brothers and sisters were here, this plate would be clean in a minute. Why? Asked Mary. Because they don't often get the chance to have such a good meal. Mary tried a little of the porridge. They would never waste such good food, Martha went on. Why, if they didn't eat, they wouldn't have the strength to run around the moor all day. Mary picked up her spoon again and started to eat slowly as she listened to Martha talking about her family, and especially about her brother Dickon, who spent most of his time on the moor playing with different animals. Mary was so intrigued by Martha's stories that she decided to go out and have a walk around Mr. Craven's gardens. She became even more curious when Martha mentioned a garden which had been locked up since Mrs. Craven died. Martha didn't know where it was. It was a secret garden. Chapter 2. Secrets of the Manor. Mary took a long walk around the gardens. She looked at the birds and animals, which were so different from the ones she used to see in India. But what she was really interested in were the many doors she saw. Each of them led to a garden. One of them led to the secret garden, but which one? Mary tried to open every door she saw. She visited the kitchen gardens, where vegetables were grown, and an orchard, where there were fruit trees. Although the gardens were big, it was still winter, and none of the flowers were in bloom. The gardens, therefore, did not look all that impressive. While walking around one of the orchards, she saw a small bird with a red breast sitting on a treetop. It was singing, as if calling out to her. She stopped for a while, listening to his winter song, and noticed something strange. Although she could see the treetop, she could not find a door in the wall beyond which the bird was singing its tune. Perhaps she could ask someone. She looked around and saw a strange old man. He stood there with a spade in his hands, digging in the ground. It was Ben, the gardener. Mary came up to him. "I have been into the other gardens," she started, and I went into the orchard, but there was no door to the garden next to it." "What garden?" Ben replied in a rough voice, and stopped digging. "The one on the other side of the wall. There are trees there. I saw the tops of them. The bird with the red breast was sitting on one of them and was singing." Ben's face suddenly changed. He smiled and started to whistle. He looked very different with a smile on his face. He looked almost nice, Mary thought. She watched surprised as the small red-breast bird flew over and landed on the ground next to Ben. "Where have you been?" Ben asked the bird. "I didn't see you yesterday." The little bird seemed to understand every word. It looked at Ben and wasn't at all afraid of him or of Mary. "Do you know him? Does he always come to you when you call him?" asked Mary. "Of course he does. I've known him since he was a baby. He fell out of his nest and I took care of him because his family flew away. He was all alone, and I was all alone. Now we're friends. It's Robin the Redbreast." Mary knelt next to the robin and whispered that she was all alone too. "So you are this little girl from India?" Ben asked. Mary nodded. "And I have no friends at all," said Mary. Ben pointed at the robin, which was sitting on the branch of an apple tree, singing happily. "I think he'd like to be your friend." So Mary came closer and asked, "Would you make friends with me?" The robin finished his song and flew away. Mary turned back to Ben. She wanted to ask him about the locked garden, where it was, and how she could get in. But Ben didn't want to talk about it. His smile disappeared. "You stay out of things that have nothing to do with you," he said rudely, and turned back to his digging. "I'll have to find it myself then. And I will, thought Mary. Days went by. Mary began to spend more and more time in the fresh air. Her cheeks reddened, and she became stronger and healthier. She could now eat the whole breakfast, even if it was porridge, without complaining. She also became great friends with Martha, who told her stories about her big family. She had 11 brothers and sisters. Mary had nothing to play with, and so she spent all day walking about the gardens and orchards, sometimes looking for Ben, sometimes for Robin. When she did find him, he was usually sitting on the same treetop where Mary had found him the first time. Soon she was sure that Robin's tree was inside the secret garden, but she could never find the door to it. One morning the weather outside was windy and cold, and Mary didn't go out, but stayed with Martha. They sat and listened to the noises made by the blowing wind, and talked about the secret garden. "Mr. Craven locked it up after his wife died. Nobody's been there since," said Martha. "Why does he hate it so much?" asked Mary. "Mrs. Medlock says it's none of our business. It was his wife's garden, and they both loved it so much. They spent lots of time there. They locked themselves in and didn't allow anybody to bother them. There was a big tree which Mrs. Craven used to sit on. One day the branch she was sitting on broke and she fell. She hurt herself so badly that the next day she died. Mr. Craven nearly went crazy with sorrow. Now he doesn't allow anybody even to talk about her or the garden." Mary sat in silence, thinking that now she had an idea what it meant to feel sorry for someone, because now she felt sorry for her uncle and his poor wife. She was close to crying for them, but instead, strangely, she heard a cry of somebody else. It was as if a child was crying somewhere in the house. "It was just the wind in the trees," said Martha nervously. "No, it wasn't. I heard somebody crying, and it wasn't a grown-up," insisted Mary. "It was the wind," Martha said. "And if not the wind, then it was little Betty down in the kitchen crying because of toothache." Martha got up, ran out of the room and shut the door, turning the key and locking Mary in. Mary did not believe Martha's explanation for a second. She was sure she had heard a child crying. It was raining the following day, so Mary couldn't walk outside again. "What do your brothers and sisters do when it's raining?" she asked Martha. "They play, but there's not much to do. Only Dickon goes to mow when it's raining. He says he has to look after his animals." "I have nothing to do," said Mary sadly. "Can you read?" "I can, but I have no books." "If only Mrs. Medlock allowed you to go to the big library in the house. You'd surely find something to read for yourself then. There are thousands of books there." Mary, who never felt the need to ask anybody for permission, decided to look for the library herself. She wanted to wander around the house and see whether there really were so many locked rooms. She moved along the corridors and tried to open some of the doors she saw. Suddenly, she heard the same cry that she had heard the day before. But it was so much nearer now, she could almost hear where it was coming from. Looking for a way in, she came across Mrs. Medlock. "What you doing here?" Mrs. Medlock shouted. "What did I tell you? Keep to your own room." I turned the wrong corridor and got lost. I didn't know where to go, and then I heard somebody crying," Mary tried to explain. "You didn't hear any such thing. Go back to your room now." To make sure she did, Mrs. Medlock went with Mary all the way back to her room and locked her inside. Mary was furious. Somebody was crying, and I heard it twice. Chapter 3. The Secret Garden and Dickon. When the weather got better, Mary started to go out again and soon forgot about the crying child. The truth was, she had something else on her mind. The secret garden. She wished so much that she could find it. And she wished so much to see if the flowers and plants there grew like in the other gardens. But she could not find the secret door leading into the garden. So she spent her days running around, happy to be out again, and talking to Robin or to Ben when she ran into them. One day she saw Ben working with 2 other gardeners. "Springtime is coming," he began. "Can you smell it?" Mary took a deep breath and said, "I smell something nice, fresh and damp." "That's the earth," he said. "It's getting ready to grow things. The sun is warming them. You'll soon see bits of green coming out the earth." "What will they be?" "Crocuses and snowdrops and daffodils. Haven't you ever seen a crocus?" "No. In India everything is green after the rains, and I think everything grows in one night. Here I'm afraid you'll have to wait longer for them to grow. In this part of the world it takes time for things to grow." She then heard the wind whistling and saw Robin. "Do you think he remembers me?" she asked Ben. "He knows everything and everyone in these gardens," said Ben. "Is everything coming to life in his garden too?" "What garden?" "The one he lives in," said Mary. "Ask him," Ben suggested. So Mary slowly walked down the path, and when she saw the bird again, he was walking around one of the flower beds. She came closer, but he wasn't afraid at all. "You do remember me," she said. She came up even closer and noticed something shiny on the ground. When she bent down, she saw a piece of metal. She picked it up. It was an old key. Mary put it in her pocket. It might be the key to the secret garden, she thought. It might be the key that had been buried in the ground for 10 years. She decided to carry it with her at all times, just in case she found the secret door that led to the garden. Martha went away for a day to see her family, and when she came back, she brought Mary a present. It was a skipping rope with blue and red handles. Mary had never seen a skipping rope before, and she didn't know what to do with it. "What's it for?" she asked curiously. "What for?" Martha could not believe her own ears. "Just watch me." And Martha showed her how to skip, run, and play with it. Mary looked at her in amazement. "It looks very nice, and your mother is a very kind woman. Do you think I will ever skip like you?" "Just try it." And Mary tried, and liked it. Suddenly she stopped, out of breath. "Martha, it was with your own money. Thank you," she said quietly. It was the first time she had ever thanked anybody in her life. It was a windy day, but Mary was so pleased with her new toy that she didn't care much about the cold weather, and happily skipped around the gardens. Although she wasn't very good at first, she didn't give up. She decided to skip along the walls surrounding the garden with no door. She saw the robin again, who was following her. He had never seen a skipping rope before either. As for Mary, she wondered whether he knew how to get inside the garden. All the walls around it were covered with thick ivy. Just then, the wind blew apart the ivy leaves, and Mary saw a small metal lock. Was this the lock to the secret garden? She took the key out of her pocket, carefully placed it into the lock, and turned it. It worked. She looked around to see if anyone had seen her, but there was no one. She opened the door and walked straight through into the secret garden. The garden was wild. Mary could, however, imagine how the garden must have once looked, mysterious in all its beauty. It was completely still inside. Mary had no idea whether the rose trees or other plants were still alive. She saw some pale green things coming out of the earth, small green plants just like the one Ben had told her about. She knew they were the first spring flowers. Slowly she walked around, carefully taking care not to step on any of the flower beds. When she got to the small green plants, she decided to pull at the grass around to give the plants more air and more sun. She picked up a sharp piece of wood and started digging around them. In the evening, when Mary got back to her room, she couldn't stop thinking of how to look after the garden. Her garden, or so it seemed. She asked Martha where the garden tools could be found and what kind of flowers might grow in the early springtime. "It's such a big and lonely place. The house is lonely, the park is lonely, and the gardens are shut up. There are not many things for me to do or to play with. There is no one to talk to except you and Ben, and you have your work, and Ben can't speak to me all the time. I thought if I had a little spade I could dig somewhere like Ben does, and I might make a little garden if he gives me some seeds. How much would a spade cost? I have some money. Mrs. Medlock gives me 1 shilling every Sunday, but so far there hasn't been anything to spend it on." Martha was really happy to see Mary so changed, and changed for the better, since the day they met, and so wanted to help her. Together they wrote a letter to Dickon. They asked him to buy a set of garden tools and flower seeds, and they put Mary's money in the envelope. A few days later, Mary saw a boy sitting under a tree and playing with a squirrel. He was a funny-looking boy, about 12 years old, with a round face and red cheeks and red hair. He had a wide smile, and even his big blue eyes were smiling. When he saw Mary, he gave her a sign not to come closer. He moved very slowly, because he didn't want to scare the squirrel away. "I'm Dickon," he said. "And you must be Miss Mary Lennox." "Yes, I am," Mary replied. So this was Dickon. "Did you get Martha's letter?" she asked. "That's why I've come," replied Dickon. Dickon had brought her a set of garden tools, a spade, a rake, a pitchfork, and some flower seeds. Soon they spoke as if they had known each other for a long time. Dickon told Mary about the seeds, what kind of earth she could plant them in, and what they would look like when they had grown. He also told her how to look after them, when to water them, and what signs to look out for. "I'll plant them for you myself, if you like," he offered. "Where's your garden?" Mary wasn't sure whether to tell him about the secret garden or not, so instead she asked him, "I don't know much about boys. Can you keep a secret?" "Of course I can," said Dickon, looking at her in surprise. "I keep secrets all the time. There's so much I know about wild animals and their homes, that if I ever told anybody, they would be in danger." "I've stolen a garden," said Mary, with tears in her eyes. "It isn't mine. It was nobody's, and nobody takes care of it. I'm the only person who wants it alive." Dickon's eyes became larger with surprise. So Mary led him to her secret garden. At first, he stood for a couple of minutes looking around in complete amazement. He saw the rose trees, and to Mary's great surprise, he said they were alive. Then he saw the little green plants coming out of the earth, and he saw somebody had cleared the ground around them. "Have you done that?" he asked. "That's a good job. You'll be a good gardener." They both knelt down and started to work with Mary's garden tools. Time passed quickly. Soon, Mary heard the bell that signalled dinner, and so she had to go back to the house. Before she went, though, Dickon promised her that he would come again to help her in the garden.